Hey everyone, and welcome to the session, Training Officers Consortium Annual Institute. This is one of our great afternoon sessions, Sustaining Balance Amidst Virtual Chaos. I don't know about you, but I've had lots of chaos lately. Our presenter today is John Reardon. John has been building leaders and strengthening teams for many years. First, as co-founder and director of Cornerstone Leadership Academy for 8 years in Uganda, and for 20 years as a leadership and OD consultant with a wide range of federal, private sector, and nonprofit clients. John sees the potential for leadership in every individual. He's worked with hundreds of leaders and teams around the world, challenging them to expand their capacity and impact. He has a unique ability to quickly connect with very diverse styles and tailor an engagement to a client's particular needs. John received his MA in Educational Management from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda, and his BA in Public Policy from Washington and Lee. I want to remind everybody you are able to fully participate in this session. I know John's going to have a great Q&A at the end, but in the meantime, you can connect with us via the chat in LinkedIn, the chat in FeedLoop, and I know John has somebody in that chat, as well as by the Q&A button. Just click on the blue bar below the video that's playing and you'll be able to ask a question. So without further ado, John Reardon.
Thank you, Cheryl. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here. This is exciting. These are a lot of firsts for many of us, the first virtual annual institute, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to support and offer some insight and tips and tools. And as Cheryl mentioned, I am absolutely learning along the way. This topic has been very close to home for me, and I'm sure for many of us throughout the past year, and it really continues to be relevant. I mean, up to today, getting connected and getting everything up and running, it's just all a lot of learning on so many levels for so many people. I've been working with leaders and teams for the past 20 years in person, helping teams and leaders expand their capacity to get great results. And in the past year, it's been a tremendous challenge to transition to the virtual environment. Excited to say that that's getting traction. It's really happening. As you can see, these things are starting to really take hold and work well as we get such a broad adoption across the communities. Appreciate your service. I spent 8 years in the developing world, as Cheryl mentioned, in Uganda, and it doesn't take long to realize what we take for granted here in this country in terms of our civil service and our public service, when you see what it's like when you don't have it. So thank you for your service. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to speaking on this topic. I've been using this topic, gosh, with a lot of clients are really asking about this, because you can imagine it's still very relevant. As much as it was a year ago, it continues to be today. As we go through this, as Cheryl mentioned, use the chat function. If questions come up or comments at any point, just put those in. We'll circle back in the Q&A time at the end. And then I'll be asking for your input along the way with a couple questions and things in the chat function as we go. So let's go ahead and get into the material. The first thing I want to underscore, and I don't know if you've heard this phrase, suddenly virtual, but boy, when I heard that, I grabbed it. It made so much sense, because if you look at the literature about working in a virtual environment, there's pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID assumes intentionally virtual, right? Organizations that set themselves up for virtual work, individuals who chose to work virtually, they got themselves set up in their home office and they have this place where they can kick back and do great work. I don't know about you, but that wasn't my experience. I am part of the suddenly virtual camp, and that picture hits close to home. I didn't have an office. We had to kick my kids around and reshuffle the house so that I could create a home office. The kids are studying from home. My wife is overwhelmed with everybody around now suddenly, right? So we're all still going through this tumultuous time of being suddenly virtual, and it's not the same as intentionally. And I would really challenge you and encourage you to ask yourself, first of all, how are you doing in the midst of this, right? Day by day, hour by hour, perhaps minute by minute, how am I doing, right? I know for me, it is a lot of ups and downs. And then pausing and saying, either way, if I'm doing great or I'm not doing well, Second question, how are my colleagues doing? How are my team members doing? How's my supervisor doing, right? How are the people around me doing in the work world, leave alone in my personal relationships? And just really pausing and checking in. I see in my experience with different client groups, the entire spectrum, from some people who are loving this and they are in their dream situation, working virtually, it's going great, they're getting great stuff done, all the way across the spectrum to really, really, truly tragic situations. Isolation, really mental health issues with isolation, or overwhelming with kids around 24/7 and they didn't ask to homeschool and suddenly they're in these situations. So it's a really important time to pause, ask yourself how you're doing, and then check in with your colleagues, your supervisor. It doesn't matter if you're in authority, you can play that role of asking, how am I doing? How are you doing? And then pause and really listen, right? That's that second step. So what I want to do in terms of this idea of balance, we're going to look at this in 4 areas. So I want to ask you to think about this for yourself, and then I'm going to ask you to respond in the chat. So how are you doing in the physical area, the emotional area, mental area, and spiritual area? Very simple way to put those. But do you feel like this? So I love this image, right? Image number 1 is, like you can just feel that sense of balance, right? In this open space. I'm very visual. I love what that image communicates. It's like everything's in its place and it's just sitting in that peaceful setting. Or do you feel more like this, right? She's teetering on the balance beam, right? She hasn't fallen off, but just sort of like swinging her arms to gain balance. That's how I feel most of the time. Every once in a while, I hit that picture number 1. Most of the time, I'm in picture number 2, right? Tottering on the balance beam. Or number 3, right? Just a pile of rubble. Yesterday afternoon, I got logged out of a system. I had to rejoin. I had to go back through all the steps. And at the end of it, I felt like that, right? It was 6 p.m. and I was done. Like it had just tumbled. And I sort of go through these different states throughout the day. So in the chat, does one of these pictures sort of reflect how you feel in this moment? Most of the time, you can put in multiple answers. I'm curious, is it minute by minute, day by day, hour by hour, 1, 2, or 3? And we'll just see what folks are saying in terms of how that resonates for you. What state do you feel like you're in terms of balance? So go ahead and put those in the chat.
So Joy is telling us it varies. I can tell you from me, it's definitely a 1.
Good for you. I'm glad to hear it. I know for me, it's that number 2. It's that teetering feeling. Anything else in there? Have a think about it. And as you think about it, then also remember, ask your colleagues, ask your supervisor, be perceptive. I had one client who said, oh, I'm killing it, right? He's loving this. He's number 1. He's feeling balanced. He's feeling productive. I asked him, how are your team members doing? Oh, like kind of was a surprising question to him. Like, isn't everyone feeling great? Like, nope.
So Patricia from EPA says it depends on the work volume and stress. And Joy's answer was, she hasn't hit the rubble yet.
Good for you. You're like that, the teetering, arms swinging, trying to get your balance back. Yeah, absolutely. Conversely, if you do feel like that rubble, you feel like, oh, it's collapsed, it's not working, the kids are crying, the dog's barking, whatever, deep breath. You can't bring all of that into the workplace. You can't bring all of that onto that video conference or every interaction, but you do need to find ways to gain support, right? To get the help you need to regain balance. So I'm hoping we'll touch on some helpful strategies for you in this quick discussion, but also be thinking about where you get support to regain balance. So in the workbook that comes with this session, you can take a look at that later. There's an activity for reflection on page 2, and you can scroll through a self-assessment in each of the 4 areas just to have a think. How am I doing in each of these areas when it comes to the physical area? Am I feeling not well, exhausted, stressed? Am I getting the aches and pains that come with all of that? Or on the other end, are you feeling healthy, well, right? You're exercising, you're eating right, and you're doing great, good for you, or somewhere in between. And in the emotional side, the mental aspect and the spiritual aspect. So scroll through that self-assessment when you get a few minutes later and consider where you are on that. And again, a great series of questions for you to ask others to check in with them and see how they're doing. And then there's some reflection questions on page 3 that you can take some time and go a little bit further into what's underneath that. All right, so we are going to explore this in 3 strategies, 3 general strategies, each of which you can unpack much further. First is about building resilience. Second, establishing healthy boundaries, which is absolutely necessary when it comes to balance. Otherwise, you'll be knocked out of balance. And third, implementing daily habits, healthy daily habits. So what does resilience look like? What do you think of when you hear the word resilience? And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put some images up, and I'd be curious which one resonates for you. So first is this idea of the tire, right? That just keeps taking a beating. Right? A tire is very resilient, but boy, that's a pretty tough image, right? It just kind of keeps on taking it and keeps absorbing a beating. Yes, resilience, whew, I feel like that at times for sure. The second image is this soldier slogging through the mud, right? Resilient, taking on the challenge, making it through the obstacle course, you know, hoping to get to the other side. Again, another kind of image of resilience, and I definitely feel like that some days. A different picture of resilience is this idea of finding a source within, right? So this image of the flower coming up out of the desert, the roots are tapping into something. It's not about what's happening around me, it's what's happening in me. Boy, I need to get to that place more often than I do. And because that's really ultimately the goal. And so I'm curious in the chat, image 1, the tires, image 2, the soldier sort of slogging through the obstacle course, or image 3, right? Finding resources and source from within. Which one resonates for you around resilience? Put that in there. I'll be curious to hear. And then Cheryl, please feel free to read those out as I just go to the next slides, but keep checking in and we'll see what's in there.
Will do.
1, 2, or 3. So a strategy for building resilience. We're going to talk about how you strengthen that muscle. The ability to bounce back from challenging situations, right? The ability to absorb, the ability to adjust, the ability to not fight back necessarily, perhaps at times, but more importantly, to choose a response. So the idea of mindfulness, checking in, pausing, being mindful. A colleague of mine, Monica Tucker, and I developed an online course with this topic. And within that, she speaks to the topic of mindfulness and some simple practices. So I'm going to share a clip right now, 5 minutes, that works through that thought of mindfulness and a quick practice that you can use every day. So during challenging times, it is normal to experience increased stress. Stress is the body's response to a perceived threat or challenge, whether conscious or even subconscious, and it can show up in various physical ways. Assessing our physical state may be the easiest way to determine if stress is being built up. You might feel back pain, neck pain. I know sometimes I have restless sleep. In the physical realm, stress can show up as fight, flight, or freeze. In the fight mode, we can become argumentative or even aggressive, especially in the way others experience us. In flight mode, we might distract ourselves and focus on other things or distance ourselves from the present. And in freeze mode, we might shut down altogether or avoid the threat entirely. Without a way to deal with the stress, it can build up and impact us in all kinds of negative ways. So in order to sustain balance amidst the virtual chaos and combat the stress, we've got to build up resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from challenging situations and to have the wisdom to know when to set a boundary and effectively adapt to change and thrive. One way to build up resilience is to manage our emotions and regulate our mood by being mindful. In other words, own your emotions, but don't let your emotions own you. So I walked into a Barnes & Noble bookstore and I saw a book titled Mindfulness for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Well, I was immediately intrigued and had to buy the book. Harris is a well-known reporter who experienced an anxiety attack on live television
and discovered the practice of mindfulness. He likens managing his thoughts and emotions to a lion tamer trying to control a wild animal. That resonated for me. Monica is well versed in the practice of mindfulness. She's going to walk us briefly through the intent behind the practice and then give you an example of a mindfulness exercise you can use anytime, anywhere.
Mindfulness is being aware, paying attention in the present, in the mind and body with an attitude of curiosity and kindness. It's really being in the now rather than having our mind wander, worrying about something in the past, or being anxious about something in the future. Being in the now is really the only place we can manage our stress. One tool we can use to become resilient is the STOP method. STOP stands for stop, 3 breaths, observe, and proceed. Let's walk through each step now. The first step is stop. So often when we're in stress, we will go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, as mentioned earlier. But if we can just stop, we can pause in the middle of those responses and slow things down. The second step is 3 breaths. By taking 3 belly breaths, we can physiologically shift the emotions in the body and become more present to the moment. It also gives time for our brain to move from the amygdala, or the emotionally hijacked part of the brain, the one that gets triggered, so that relax and move back into the prefrontal cortex, or the more rational side of the brain. We'll now take 3 breaths together. So take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the breath. Now take a second deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the body. And now let's take a 3rd deep breath in, and as you breathe out, set an intention. The 3rd step is observe. In the observe step, we will check in with the body, thoughts, and feelings through a short guided mindfulness practice. The final step is proceed. Once you have slowed down your body and mind, we have the option to now step back, reflect, shift perspectives, create options, and respond flexibly. Often, in stressful situations, we react without thinking about things. The stop practice is a great way to slow things down and respond much more effectively, thereby showing resilience.
As a leader, it's critical to watch and listen for signs of stress in yourself, but it's also part of your role as a leader to support others as they manage their own stress levels. Your team members, colleagues, your supervisor, and of course your own family members are likely to be all experiencing their own various levels of stress in the midst of disruptions. Ask them how they're doing, and then listen.
Thanks, Cheryl. So this piece about the mindfulness and being aware of my state, gosh, I really struggle with that. I find Monica's whole presentation just takes me to a place of stopping and those 3 deep breaths. That is not my natural inclination, and it's really been helpful to try to practice a pausing method, right? To just stop in the midst of and be mindful, deep breath, and then try to be intentional. In the longer run, and there are some additional tips in the workbook. I'll just touch those on the screen, but these are all in the workbook material. In the longer run, the next piece is about creating boundaries, healthy boundaries, because I can't sustain that balance if I don't have healthy boundaries, because then I'll just be knocked off course all the time. So this idea of a healthy boundary. So what's a healthy boundary? So this is a picture of no boundaries, right? The boundaryless swamp where the trash is all over the place. It's in the water, it's in the weeds. There's no boundary, there's no right place, wrong place, everything's everywhere. A different image, the other extreme, is the razor wire fence. It's a boundary, and there are times when something that extreme may be necessary, but I wouldn't call that a healthy boundary, if that makes sense, right? It's a boundary, and it's sort of the, you're dead to me, I'll never speak to you again, right? Like extreme. And sometimes that's necessary, but hopefully not often. Healthy boundary, I love this image. Right? It's a fence, it separates these 2 areas, but each area has its own health. The healthy forest on one side, the healthy grass on the other side. and the boundary sets the balance in between. I love that image. And so what about when it comes to relationships for you? Where could you benefit from setting healthy boundaries in terms of relationships? Have a think about, and in the workbook, there's an opportunity for you to put down some thoughts on personal and professional relationships, and where might you benefit from working on developing, establishing, sustaining healthy boundaries? How's your relationship with your supervisor? Would you call it healthy? Would you say there's healthy boundaries? Right? Are you getting requests in an appropriate fashion? Are you getting them in crisis mode all the time, 24/7, right? Throwing you off balance. Have you had those conversations? Conversely, what can you do to support them in a healthy way and find balance? Colleagues, direct reports if you have them. And then of course, in your personal life, this is very relevant for me. We're here, my wife is here, we have 4 young adult children. We are having to really work at this constantly. So spouse or partner, children, other family members, neighbors, and community, this idea of healthy boundaries to be able to sustain healthy relationships and balance. There's some tips in the workbook on page 6 when you have a chance to get into that, an opportunity to think through what's the current situation, describing what is out of balance, where is there need for balance and boundary. How would you approach that, right? Would you make a request? Would you make a proposal? Are you asking for something, or are you suggesting or recommending something? And then consequences are inherently involved in boundaries. What happens if the boundary is sustained? What happens if the boundary is not sustained? And a phrase you could write down, I heard this recently, it really struck me. Setting a boundary is not about changing someone else's behavior. It's about committing to change my own behavior, right? So I'm gonna suggest this boundary. I'm asking you to respect it. If you do respect this boundary, we can negotiate, then this is how I'll behave. If that boundary is not respected, then I have to change my behavior. I have to change my response. It's not about controlling you. It's about taking ownership of myself. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat and the comments about the boundaries. Man, that's a really enormous conversation, but something that just is so relevant in this conversation about balance when lives are turned upside down. So the final area is about healthy daily habits. And gosh, this, if anything, I would say, give myself a little bit of a pat on the back, is in terms of staying with certain daily habits that have really helped me manage the stress levels throughout this. So in the emotional realm, right, do you have healthy daily habits? So I don't know about you, but we have picked up a habit, I won't say daily, but nearly daily, of a 6 p.m. happy hour. So I knock off work, I try to finish by then. So like I said, our young adult kids are back. We try to get together, 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of us, or 6 of us in total, and we try to mark the end of the day. So just connecting with each other. We're spending more time watching movies together, going for walks as the weather's great. So finding a chance to connect emotionally amidst all the different stressors that are happening, checking in with each other, right? How's everybody doing and how can we support each other? Physically, I've been able to get out, try to exercise most days, just de-stress, right? Do you have something that you can do on the physical realm, whatever it might be? And I'd love to hear your suggestions in the chat as to what's working for you, right? In any of these areas, right? What do you do on a day-to-day basis that's helping? Nutrition, well-being, the mindfulness piece, exercise, right, etc. Mentally, I don't know about you, but being deep into this whole virtual world has really created stress for me. I had to learn to step back, take multiple breaks during the day so that I wouldn't feel drained and just exhausted by the end of a long virtual workday. So mentally, staying mentally balanced and mentally healthy, engaging in other endeavors as opposed to just the work stuff. And then spiritually, whatever your practice may be, do you have some connection, some practice where you can step away from, right, and engage in, whether that's prayer, whether it's worship, whether it's reflection, whether it's meditation, and right, and just being thoughtful about that in terms of creating a holistic sense of balance for yourself. So I'd be fascinated for you to put in the chat, what kinds of things are you doing on a day-to-day basis that are helping you stay balanced in any one or more of these areas? So please go ahead and put those things in there. I'll be curious to see what starts to show up.
So Joy is saying scheduling time on her work calendar as unavailable.
Yes. Amen to that. Absolutely. That was a big, big light bulb for me that I had to do that in advance, well in advance. And that was a conversation that we had to have with colleagues to agree that there are certain days and certain times when we will be unavailable and that that's okay. And then letting each other know in advance, hey, I'll be out these days or in these days, and some of the pacing things, because it's not fair for last minute requests and I send it out expecting them to respond and they're off. Yep, blocking time, absolutely. And if there's anything else as you're thinking about it, I'd love to hear it. I just, thankfully, we have a gym not far away, and they did a great job of setting up the COVID practice, I guess you'd call it. So from the minute you walk in, mask, space, wiping down, cleaning afterwards, it's very specific and very regulated, past about 5 or 6 months. And it's really been a great opportunity before the weather got nice. Now that the weather's better, just getting outdoors is really a big deal for me.
So we have lots of things. Jeff Abbott says he has a new, very energetic golden retriever puppy who needs 3 good walks a day or things get chewed up. Patricia Hemmer says participating in bi-weekly mindful moment sessions at work.
Right.
And Sean Rees says talking to her family about their thorn of the day and the rose of the day.
Okay.
It's a chance to discuss the bad part and the good part of the day.
Right. That's great. I love that metaphor too, the thorn and then the rose too. Awesome. Yep. My wife does a gratefulness piece. What are you thankful for? Right. Really. And it's been demonstrated. It physiologically changes your mental makeup from, you can speak to those frustrations and get those clarified. What am I grateful for? And I don't know about you, but boy, it doesn't take much for me to just look around and realize, right, how much I have to be grateful for, right? We're all healthy, we're all well, we're all able to be productive. And so that gratefulness and that mentality, it doesn't mean dismissing the difficulties. Absolutely. It is about addressing those mindfully, but then choosing then to refocus and stay focused on what I'm grateful for as I address those things. That to me is the point of balance. I want to be really clear. It's not about being naive. There's an old movie called Pollyanna, if you're old enough to remember. If you haven't seen it, it's a great one to watch. You know, and she's gotten a bad name. She sees the bright side in everything. And understandably, it can rub some people the wrong way, but it's come to be a synonym for being naive, right? Oh, everything's wonderful. Rose-colored glasses is another phrase, right? So healthy balance isn't about rose-colored glasses. There's nothing wrong. Healthy balance is seeing where the challenges are and then choosing to address those mindfully and, right, finding the opportunities, seeing what there is that I can be thankful for and finding that balance in each of those areas. So the last question, there's a great metaphor that I find so powerful about put your own oxygen mask on first. So I don't know if you can remember the last time you got on an airplane. For me, it's been quite a while. Right, but the steward or stewardess will say, in the event that the cabin loses pressure, the oxygen mask will fall from the ceiling. Now on Southwest Airlines, they say, stop screaming, place the mask over your face, choose your favorite child and help them. But in reality, right, the mask will fall off the ceiling. Place your own oxygen mask on first and then assist others. Now, it's tempting to think that that's a selfish act, right? Why would I put my mask on first? I ought to help others, right? That's very selfish. Grab a mask and put it on before helping anyone else. Here's the important distinction. There's an oxygen mask for everyone. And that's a pretty good analogy, right, to use. That metaphor works pretty well. In terms of you gaining oxygen for yourself, you doing what you need to do to gain oxygen really shouldn't and probably doesn't take away anyone else's chance for them to gain oxygen. If it does, then that's a different discussion. Me exercising does not diminish anyone else's opportunity to exercise. Me eating properly might take some conversation with other family members, but that's up to me. I'm not forcing anyone else to do it. I'm not taking anything else away from anyone. It's choices that I can make to get oxygen in any of these areas. So put your own oxygen mask on first. Well, why? Pretty obviously, because if you don't, you become part of the problem very quickly, right? And now everyone is having to resuscitate you because you didn't take care of yourself. I cannot emphasize how important this is in this context. And I mean, this is quite a long way into the whole COVID crisis, and I still find this relevant on an everyday basis. And so do most, if not all, of my coaching clients and client groups. Whew, day to day, is my oxygen mask on? Am I keeping it on, right? And what are the practices? So the last question I'll ask for you to respond to in the chat specifically, you've mentioned a couple things. What gives you oxygen, right? What brings you energy? What helps you find that balance and helps you sustain? So for me, it's exercise, getting outside, walking, running. Just for me, the word outdoors in and of itself just helps me rejuvenate. Doing that multiple times a day, let alone periodically during the week. And then if I can on the weekend, getting outside, right? Take a walk, take a hike, see a beautiful view, whatever I can do. Go for a drive even, just on a beautiful day. Getting oxygenated, spending time with family to the extent that we do a weekly Zoom call with all of my siblings. And that has been a fantastic opportunity to gain oxygen and just reconnect. I get to see my mom, who I haven't seen physically in a year, but we get a chance to talk. We get a chance to catch up. Just feels rejuvenating, and then back into it. And I can assist others and give them support and give them ideas. So in the chat, what specifically helps you get oxygen? What practices, what habits, what behaviors? I'd be curious to see what goes in there as well. And then finally, I just want to offer, if you have, we're going to pause here for a little while to do Q&A, if there's anything I can offer in terms of specific questions. But if you have any question or comment or an idea or suggestion, I'd love to hear about resources that you're finding helpful in the midst of all this. You can reach me on my website and follow up with an email or a chat, and we'll have time here, and I'll be connecting with folks later. But I'd love to hear any input from you as a follow-on.
So John,
yep,
George says weekly video call with parents and her brother. And Patricia says spending time with family, making sure she gets some me time, gardening, going for a walk, and FaceTiming with the grandkids. And Gary says cooking.
Great. Yeah. I know for me, one big act of courage is leaving my phone behind. I know, shocking, right? Like choosing to not take it on the walk, or giving it to my wife and having her hold it while we're at dinner together, or something. You know, it's like just the choice to stop and step away from, in and of itself, gives me a little space, right? Gives me a little oxygen. I'm going to invite folks to shift into Q&A. And Cheryl, I think they're entering those into either the chat or the question function. Is that right?
Yep, they're entering them into the chat here. And John, if you click on chat, you should be able to see it.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay, great. So I should be able to see those as they pop up. And if you have questions, so again, touching on the three strategies, right? This idea of resilience and being able to intentionally respond in a sustainable manner. The second one we talked about is boundaries. Boy, that's a big topic, right? What it takes to develop and sustain healthy boundaries. And then third, the healthy daily habits, right? So on a day-to-day basis, what am I doing that's helping? What am I doing that's not helping? Constantly looking at my phone. I find myself, checking Facebook, looking into, it's like, what am I doing? Just stop, just put it down. That is and continues to be a challenge for me. It's just an unhealthy daily habit. What are some tips for caregivers? Yeah, absolutely. Boy, I would say support, right, is the first word that comes to mind. I haven't had personal experience, but both my parents supported my grandmother for 10 years living in our home when she was elder, and they would get support. They would support each other and hand a tag off, and then they would get support from us coming up to be there with my grandmother while they had a chance to step away, even if it was just for a few hours, leave alone a day or overnight. But boy, if you can, and if you have to hire support, but if you can find help, even if it's for a 1 hour break, just to step away. And what's ironic is this goes for young kids because they're not off to school. If you didn't ask to homeschool, then that might not be your dream. And my wife has a friend with young children. She goes over, she just babysits the kids for an hour while the mom takes a walk. Conversely, if it's about caring elder care or somebody with physical or emotional needs in the meantime, finding an opportunity to step away, that self-care piece is not selfish, right? It is critical for you to be able to sustain that caregiving role. I know it's not always easy, it's not always immediately possible, but asking for, finding support. There are volunteer organizations who might be able to help provide and offer some support. Of course, it has to be the right person in the right circumstance. Yeah, but I would really encourage you in that, and God bless you as you're doing that. That's absolutely challenging role. And many folks are split between caring for young children and for somebody who's elderly or physically in need. I'll just mention, and again, please feel free to put the questions in. When it comes to boundaries, I think one of the most challenging aspects of boundaries, of healthy boundaries, is the consequence point, because the boundary doesn't mean anything unless there's some positive consequence if this works, and essentially negative, right? A counter consequence if this isn't respected. And setting those and figuring that out continues to be very challenging, right? It's not as easy, like with a teenager, right? If you don't do this, well, then you can't drive the car, or you're grounded, or whatever. Well, with other adults or colleagues, you can't ground your colleague. So what do? Right? I'll stop talking to you. Well, that's not a healthy boundary. So how do I set boundaries and have consequences meaningfully in a working relationship, right? These are the behaviors I'll exhibit. Well, I will not be able to respond after certain times or during certain days, on the weekends or whatever. That's about me controlling my behavior, and there may be consequences and risks to be faced. Oftentimes they're not as bad as I might conjure up, right? Oh, if I tell my colleague that I'm not going to respond to them over the weekend, their word's going to get back to my boss. Well, talk to my boss first, see if it's okay to set a healthy boundary that way, and then implement with others. In fact, they may jump on board and support you in trying to do that. So having the conversation about consequences is such an important piece of the boundary one. Yeah, if there's anything else, Cheryl, just let me know, or I'll be available for follow-on. And I'm, like I said, very much a learning experience for me as I'm going through this. So a lot of real-time learning on my end.
Yeah, it's the same way for all of us. John, I have a question. So how do you manage and lead up as you're trying to manage your own chaos?
Yeah. To me, the most immediate, most challenging aspect of that is the boundaries, right? So taking stock of my own resilience, being able to manage my healthy daily habits, that's up to me. That's not up to my supervisor or, others but me. But when it comes to a stress level, a workload, expectations that I feel are put upon me that are causing stress or causing, deep breath. And I do a lot of coaching in this area around, okay, so what is the situation? What can you share? And what do you feel like you can't share upline, right? Most times it's not that I can't tell them what's going on, it's how to tell them, how to have the conversation. And so if I can create the opportunity to have this discussion, as opposed to blowing up in the moment because I'm so stressed out, taking stock and saying, can we talk? I love metaphors. The other one I use all the time is the rubber band, right? If I'm feeling like this, there aren't many supervisors who want their people to be at this level. Now, if you are in an organization where this like absolute stress tension is the norm, then we have to have a conversation about whether that's the right place for you to be. And are you okay to sustain that? And it may, there are forces that may challenge you to do so. But I'd ask you, is that sustainable in the long term? And what are your options? If that really is the expectation. Now, if you can have a conversation about, can we ease off and how might we? Could we set some agreements? Is it okay to block time on my calendar so that I can focus on other work? can we set boundaries around expectations for response, right? As opposed to 24/7, you know, frantically responding to messages and requests. And those conversations often can springboard and open up discussion with upline folks and or teams as a whole about what are some habits that we can establish to get a better sense of balance for everybody. That's, I know, easier said than done, but that would be a quick response.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do have a few minutes left. If there's any last minute questions for John, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can raise your hand.
I'll look forward to seeing everybody and meeting everybody. It's been fun to get to know a few of the other presenters and some of the attendees, and some of the folks from the organization. It's been great. And Cheryl, thank you for all the organizing.
Oh, you're welcome.
Speaking of balance, I don't know if you're going to go to a spa for 3 days after this is over, but but you should.
I'm going to enjoy adult beverages at 4:01 this afternoon. On that note, everyone, thank you so much for joining John's presentation. As a reminder, the recording of this session will be uploaded next week, and you have access to all the sessions from the AI for an entire year. You can connect with John once you get into the feed loop. You can connect with him in the speakers area. There's a link to him in his session as well. And don't forget the download. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, everyone.